likes of him, not only on certain individuals whom they've targeted, but also on our whole nation. Let us not beat around the bush. Pravin Gordh destroyed many of the state-owned enterprises in our country, over and above all the other damage that he had wreaked during the long years of his treacherous political involvement. Our state-owned enterprises are the most important tools that we need to utilize and make sure that they can bring about the upliftment of the majority of poor, Black, and especially African South Africans. And Pravin Gordh, together with his white monopoly capitalist friends, attacked those state-owned enterprises at their very roots and destroyed them. Over and above the other terrible things, the terrible undermining of the basic rights of our people, the terrible way in which he used the South African Revenue Service and the rogue unit in order to target certain people, those who were his enemies. So I'm not going to apologize by saying that Pravin Gordh was truly one of the worst things that had happened to South Africa during our democratic dispensation. But in fact, I should rephrase that. One of the worst that happened to us for a very long part in our body politic. Because Gordh and his co-conspirators, his co-Kabbalists, that have been exposed also in that report by the African National Congress, which came out even before the ANC returned to South Africa after it was unbanned. And the longest-serving president of the African National Congress, President Oliver Reginald Tambo, published that report. It is there amongst all the documents in the O'Malley archives. And there we get the warning. Beware of this cabal, which is being led by people such as Pravin Gordh, Zak Yaqub, and others. Despite that warning, despite the fact that that report was issued by President Tambo, we in South Africa allowed Pravin Gordh to gain ground. We allowed Pravin Gordh to become one of the most powerful figures in our South African body politic, feared by so many. We allowed Gordh to institute his insidious actions to destroy not only our right to freedom of speech, because he targeted those who spoke out, but also, as I said already, to destroy those very critical, most important instruments that we had in the form of our state-owned enterprises in order to uplift the majority of poor in South Africa. The damage that Pravin Gordh had wreaked on our society is indeed immeasurable. And the horrible legacy that he leaves, now also after he had passed on, is one that all of us are going to bear the brunt and the burden of in the years to come, especially the poorest of the poor. And that's why I believe so strongly that in order to speak out about this terrible legacy, to call it out also as a warning that this should never happen in the future again, that we should never allow people like Pravin Gordh to rise and become the ogres that they become to our society, that is indeed Ubuntu, to speak out, not to have this false notion that one must tell sweet lies about those who have passed on. The evil that Pravin Gordh committed did not happen only during the time that he was alive. It continues to impact and prevail on all of us, also after he had passed on. I think that the statement that the economic freedom fighters issued on Friday the 13th, when Gordh passed away in the early morning hours, was the most profound statement of all the statements that had been made since he died. And I want to highlight some of those issues. In that statement, the economic freedom fighters note that the death of Pravin Gordh must not be met with the pretense of sorrow. We note that Gordh was a man whose legacy is deeply intertwined with the destruction of our state-owned enterprises and fundamentally the betrayal of the people of South Africa. The EFF states, we cannot mourn counter-progressive forces that stood against the potential of building a successful sovereign country that serves its people. Instead, rather than mourning, we must be reminded of the wreckage that Pravin Gordh leaves behind. Wreckage that has ravaged the lives, as I've already said, of millions of ordinary South Africans. Gordon's rise within the ANC's ranks led to his appointment as Minister of Finance in 2009 under President Jacob Zuma, a position that he held until 2014, and then again from 2015 to 2017 after briefly stepping down. During this time, Gordh already had been pointed out, as we pointed out earlier, been one of the most destructive forces in our struggle for liberation. When he was named by the ANC President Oliver Tambo, I've also referred to this before, as a key member of the secret Indian cabal of the 1980s. The cabal was notorious for the prosecution of Mama Winnie Madikizela Mandela, which was rejected by our people. In 2018, Gordh was appointed the Minister of Public Enterprises under President Cyril Ramaphosa, a move that signaled his role in so-called clearing up of the very state-owned enterprises that would later deteriorate under his terrible leadership. It is here, in this final public role that was given to him by Ramaphosa, that Gordh presided over the disintegration of our country's most critical state assets. Pravin Gordh was the embodiment of greed, of corruption, and of elitism. His tenure as Minister of Public Enterprises was a period of unparalleled disaster for every state-owned enterprise that he laid his hands on. Under his leadership, Eskom became a shadow of its former self, plunging our country into a permanent state of load shedding, while blackouts shattered livelihoods and businesses across our nation, especially the businesses of black entrepreneurs, the emerging black business class. Transnet, which once facilitated the efficient movement of goods throughout our country, is now totally in ruins, barely able to function at all. Denel, which was a proud defense company, was brought to its knees, while South African Airways, our national airline, was sold off in a corrupt deal that reeks of nothing less than treason. Those of you who are regular participants in these In My Crosshairs X Spaces will recall the X Space that we held specifically about South African Airways and the disaster that Pravin Gordh visited on SAA in the most corrupt way, making sure that his friends are the main benefactors. This infamous SAA Takatsu deal, which Gordon orchestrated for his friends, remains one of the most scandalous examples of how this man sold out our nation's assets for private interests. This deal, as we said also in that X Space a couple of months ago, was inexplicable, underhanded, and deliberately designed to benefit a select few at the expense of the many. And even now, the full extent of its treachery has not yet been properly scrutinized. Because Gordon, as one of his last acts as a minister, the man who was at the center of the corruption, evaded accountability at every turn and refused to be accountable to our legislature. In fact, in his final days as minister, Gordon literally and brazenly spat in the face of all of us as South Africans, refusing to account to us. When he was summoned to appear before Parliament, the very institution for which he was supposed to answer to the people of South Africa, he arrogantly and unapologetically declined and said that he would not comply. And in doing so, he showed his utter contempt and disdain for the people of South Africa. And when I say this, why should we then declare that we mourn this man who showed all of us collectively the middle finger? His unchecked power allowed him to operate with impunity. And now he dies with his crimes unpunished. And it is a deep pain and bitter bile in my mouth that Pravin Gordh had never been brought before a proper court of law to face the crimes that he had committed. This man did not deserve to die in luxury in the Donald Gordon Medical Academic Institute Hospital. He deserved to die in the Gordh Mampuru prison. Let us state that categorically. Every collapsed enterprise and every failure that he left hundreds of thousands of people unemployed is part of Pravin Gordhan's shameful, disgusting legacy. As an unapologetic instrument of capitalism, he deliberately dismantled the very entities that were meant to uplift and develop our nation. His actions directly contributed to the high levels of unemployment that we suffer in this country, leaving countless families who are still suffering in silence. Gordon betrayed the workers. He betrayed the poor. He betrayed the oppressed. And he did so without a shred of remorse. And what is disgusting is that he did so as a member of the African National Congress, which supposedly was meant to act as a national liberation movement, working for the liberation of the poor and oppressed. The role that Gordon played under the presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa indicates unequivocally also so the kind of person Cyril Ramaphosa himself is. because it is correct to say that in many ways, Pravin Gordh acted as the Prime Minister to the presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa. In many ways, him, together with his white monopoly capitalist friends, Martin Kingston and others, were the pullers of the strings of the puppet and the agent that we know that Cyril Ramaphosa was and continues to be. Therefore, says the economic freedom fighters, and I fully associate myself with this statement, we will not shed a tear for Pravin Gordh and the likes of him, nor will we celebrate the false legacies created by his apologists. He must be remembered for his role in stifling the growth and economic freedom in our nation, destroying the hopes of millions, and enabling the collapse of our state entities. This man's death becomes before he could face justice. But those left behind will continue to suffer the terrible consequences of his betrayal of the liberation struggle as Minister of Public Enterprises. Gordon's legacy is one of failure, of exploitation, of unbridled corruption. And may we never allow another Pravin Gordh to rise again. And if there's one central reason why I decided to have this in my Crosshairs X space 2 days after Pravin Gordh passed on, it is exactly so that we can understand the legacy of this man, that we at the same time can ask ourselves, how did we allow, after we had been pre-warned so many times, also by President O.R. Tambo, about this evil man, for him to gain the positions that he held? That we, in our understanding of how this came about, in us analyzing it, in us at the same time doing a critical assessment of his terrible legacy, will know what steps need to be taken in order to avoid this from happening again. And certainly, when I say all of this, central in the whole debacle that we faced with Pravin Gordh stands Cyril Ramaphosa and the accolades around him, including also one of Pravin Gordh's closest friends and associates, Derek Hanekom. These are the people that must take co-responsibility for the havoc and damage that Pravin Gordh inflicted on our nation. And I ask all of you as we participate tonight that we do not hold back, that we do not mince our words, but especially that we empower ourselves through analytical understanding of the reasons why this happened and the consequences, the dreadful consequences that it led to for our whole nation. As I've said, a legacy that continues to burden and weigh down on each one of us as South Africans. This is the context in which I want us to have this discussion. I've invited a couple of experts to come and give their views to us. Among them is my co-moderator, my co-host for these in my Crosshairs X spaces, Tsepo Khadima. Tsepo had written extensively about the terrible legacy of Pravin Gordh. He's been one of his most eloquent criticizers, most eloquent detractors. Tsepo will join us in a couple of minutes' time. He is just busy with another meeting. But when he joins us, I will immediately give him the opportunity to speak. Papanu Pasha had also requested me if she can come in and participate, and I said she's welcome to do so. I've also invited Dr. Leslie Ivings. Dr. Leslie Ivings is primarily an educationist, but someone who holds very strong views about the role that Pravin Gordh, the negative role that Pravin Gordh played in our society. I will look out for other participants and guests whom I've drawn their attention to this very important space of tonight. Among those is also one of our regulars, Apostle Dr. Deza, who I'm happy to see that he is already on the space. I would like to request Tepu Khadima and Papanu Pasha, because I don't yet see them here on the space, that if they are on the space, for them to request the mic, that they move to the top of the participants and I can easily identify them. Before we proceed, let us, as we always do in these spaces, maintain a moment of silence for the victims of the terrible genocide, the ongoing genocide in Palestine under apartheid Israel. But not only for the terrible deeds that apartheid Israel continues to commit over decades now through its illegal colonial occupation of Palestine, but also for the peoples of Africa, the long-suffering fellow brothers and sisters on our African continent in countries such as Southern Sudan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and also here in our own country. As I always remind the participants in this space, our country has got some of the most terrible statistics about crime, especially violent crime. Those statistics are higher than most war zones, and also gender-based violence. Underlying a very large part of this disaster that has befallen our own nation is the terrible levels of inequality and poverty in our society. Inequality and poverty which over the last number of years have only grown. And one of the most responsible people is Pravin Gordh, whom we are discussing tonight. Let us maintain this moment of silence, committing ourselves once again to fight for the liberation for the people of Palestine, never to stop speaking out against the dreadful genocide that they are faced with, as well as all the oppressed peoples of the world. As we maintain this moment of silence, can I request the guests that I have invited to join us, as I said, Dr. Leslie Ivings, Apostle Dr. Deza, my co-host Tsepo Khadima, and also Papanu Pasha, and anyone else who wants to speak. Can you please request the mic now so that I can properly list you as speakers and make sure that we all get the opportunity to speak up, because as we heard in that beautiful song, let there be courage, strength, and commitment. Let us not be silenced. India Ari said, I sing this for my brothers and sisters, for those who must not lose hope. This is our commitment, that this space must contribute to the growth and the strengthening of hope in the face of the evil, the destruction, the betrayal, the selling out that Pravin Gordh personified. Let's maintain that moment of silence. May their souls rest in peace, and may we continue to maintain the right and the duty to have righteous outrage against the evil, devilish actions of people such as Pravin Gordh. I'm now first going to hand the mic over to my dear friend, fellow fighter, Dr. Leslie Ivings. After that, I will then ask Apostle Dr. Deza to join us. Papanu Pasha, I've already requested you to please request the mic. I know what your X handle is, so as soon as you appear at the top, I will give you an opportunity. And I see that my co-host and co-moderator, Tsepo Khadima, has already joined us. I'm actually going to try and activate Tsepo's co-host request now, and if he comes in within the next couple of seconds, I will then give him the opportunity to speak first before we go to Dr. Ivings and Apostle Dr. Deza. At the moment, it seems that we are battling a little bit to get Tsepo online. Okay, Tsepo, you have come on. That's wonderful, so that we can follow the correct order of the participants for this afternoon's discussion. I don't know how much you heard of what I said in my introduction, but you yourself, Tsepo, had written extensively about the dreadful legacy of Pravin Gordh, the damage and the havoc that he had wreaked, not just on the state-owned enterprises in South Africa, but what he had actually done to the whole South African economy. During the course of this afternoon and evening's discussion, I will continue to read out short clips of statements that have been made by the economic freedom fighters about the terrible things that happened under Pravin Gordh. Let's start with the first one that I will read out, and then I'm going to hand over to Tsepo. Under Pravin Gordh, South African Airways was almost sold to the Takatsu Consortium for an insulting 51 rands, a deal that stands as one of the most scandalous betrayals of our national assets. Gordon orchestrated this corrupt scheme, deliberately handing over a key public enterprise to private interests. This treacherous deal was designed in the shadows, avoiding public accountability, and its full extent remains hidden because Gordon, deeply embedded in corruption, consistently evaded accountability to South Africans. I will, as the evening goes on, continue to read out these short statements about some of the most outrageous actions that Pravin Gordh inflicted on our South African society. I'm now handing the mic over to my co-host, Tsepo Khadima. Tsepo, thank you so much for joining us. The mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Comrade Mbangazita. Good evening to you. Good evening to the fighters as well as the comrades and compatriots on this In My Crosshairs edition today. Well, Comrade Mbangazitesa, I did apologize earlier that I would be joining late, but I'm glad all the same that I'm able to join, and thanks for the opportunity. Maybe I want to preface it in this manner that in terms of my opening remarks, in the first instance, I am of the religious belief, if you can call it that. Obviously, it's not a religious belief I'm trying to impute on anyone listening on this, but it's for the purpose of helping you to understand my own worldview and my own interpretation, and therefore how I would, articulate my viewpoints in as far as the subject matter of the day is concerned, and that the dead know nothing, and therefore Pravin Gordh doesn't even know that we are having this discussion here today because he's done, and it is therefore should be understood as to why personally I think I'm on record over a number of years, at least more than 8 years, to have I think, been very clear on what I thought he was doing wrong, on what I thought the dangers that he posed. So I'm very clear that I had no unfinished business with Pravin Gordh, and that when Pravin Gordh went to the grave, finally, he can't have had any ambiguity as to what exactly I thought he had done wrong. And even where he had done right, of course, I did, articulate those matters, and thought it was a proper thing for him to have done, particularly taking into account the position that of privilege as a minister in the government of the day, and prior to that, having been a civil servant heading one of the apex institutions. And the best way that Pravin Gordhan's legacy can be remedied, because it is in tatters, for those who are in the Pravin Gordhan fan club, the best way that they can honor him would be to reverse all the decisions that he, over many, many years, implemented, presided over. And the best way will be for them to commit to effectively repenting, turning back from all the maladies that he stood for. One of those, if I can mention a few, and others have been mentioned, the participants on this in my crosshairs would be aware that in 2017, the erstwhile ANN7 TV, also known as the Gupta TV, there was an expose where at the time there was an expose to the effect that there is a thing called IFMS, Integrated Financial Management System, which was managed under National Treasury and the South African Revenue Service, SARS. And with Pravin Gordh having been at both, but that the irregular appointments that were made, they resulted in fruitless and wasteful expenditure to the tune of 4.5 billion rand in 2017. And that looting, unfortunately, continued to this day. And that IFMS, it is still not running. And notwithstanding the waste, and nobody has ever been held accountable under any Auditor General, under any, particularly the incumbent president, because the expose happened on the eve of him coming into the office of president, and prior to that he was head of government business, so therefore he would have been aware of that rampant looting and colossal looting, which unfortunately, by the way, also extended that in 2017, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development had also had a similar IT scheme called IJS, Integrated Justice System, which in 2017 had itself racked up well over 1.6 billion rand. And all of this were authorized and presided over by none other than Trevor Manuel and Pravin Gordhan. Trevor Manuel is still alive, and therefore we are giving him an opportunity to, at least for his comrade and for his compatriot and for that legacy, to do that which is necessary, not only to effectively, I think, apologize to the people of this country for the billions and billions of rands that were wasted on just that one system. And of course, I think enough has been said about all other issues, whether it is the state-owned enterprises, how they were milked. I think in 2018 already, South African Airways, when it was ailing, was forced into spending 150 million rand to draft a business plan by one audit firm and a consulting firm from the United States, and there was no proper procurement processes. And all of these things, by the way, we did tell Pravin Gordhan when he was alive, so he knew exactly, except that he hardened his attitude, no different from how FVA de Klerk hardened his attitude, notwithstanding the colossal loss of over 3,000 tons of gold bullion, which to this day is still not, there hasn't been any effort to actually find it and bring it back to this country so that the coffers of this country can be in a better shape. So for those that are on their fan club of either FVA de Klerk or Pravin Gordhan, they now need to show that indeed they are themselves not complicit and party to this colossal, prodigious fraud that had been perpetuated on the people of this country over decades, by ensuring that now they must join efforts with those that say, here and no further, we must therefore reverse all these maladies, we must remedy all these maladies, and we must reverse all the very patently horrible, financially catastrophic decisions that were taken by the now deceased. Because the now deceased, when they were still alive, when they had a chance, they hardened their attitude. So that's really what I wanted to say, Comrade Mpangazita, to say, and to the participants here, that going forward, which is what we must do, we must look forward. We must now ask as to what action will we ourselves as patriots take to ensure that never again will our country find itself in the quagmire it found itself, whereby we were beholden to a motley crew of what one would really say arguably are totalitarian fascist dictators, who it was their way or the highway, and their way brought nothing other than pain and ruin to the economy of this country and to the livelihoods, and whereby many professionals, their careers were destroyed and were in tatters, unwarrantedly so. And then how will we ensure that never again will we have a situation whereby the president of the country is incapacitated to take action? One thing that at least I think we can say is that one President Zuma, when it came to his attention, notwithstanding the history that they had in the struggle for against apartheid, but when it came to having to act in the best interest of the country, he did act by removing Pravin Gordhan in March 2017 on the 31st. And of course, we remember that very famous day on April 1, where he marched into office at Treasury to say that he wanted to have some, a handover of some sort, and he went on a rant complaining, and that, of course, is the day when he earned the name Joshua Doe. That must be avoided for us as a nation to ever find ourselves in that. So we are calling on all those that claim and proclaim to have loved Pravin Gordhan to now do what is right and to remedy the maladies that he perpetuated on the people of this country, if indeed they care about his legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Tsepo Khadima, and thanks for the very particular angle that you've taken, that the only way to deal with the legacy of Pravin Gordhan is to undo all the terrible things that he had done. You also referred to Trevor Manuel, one of his co-conspirators, to put it in such a clear language. And I think your hope, sadly, Tsepo, that he is going to change his ways, that Trevor Manuel is going to turn around and say, let's undo the legacy of what myself and Pravin Gordhan had done, is not going to happen. I listened to Manuel yesterday in his utterly despicable response to the media statement of the economic freedom fighters. He is persisting in his ways. And I believe that one of the ways in which we need to prevent this kind of thing that happened under Pravin Gordhan to happen again in the future is to make sure that there is accountability, that there is consequence management, and that people such as Trevor Manuel need to face the consequences of their actions, need to face also the necessary criminal charges being brought against them for what they had done, for their complicity in the actions that had been carried out by Gordhan and themselves as a collective. So complicity must be dealt with on the basis of accountability. And there must be consequence management against people like Trevor Manuel and all the others who've been part of Pravin Gordhan's coterie of evil men and women who inflicted the kind of damage that I've tried to summarize in my opening remarks. Before I hand over to Dr. Leslie Ivings, I'm going to read out another one of those summaries of what happened under Pravin Gordhan. This one refers to Transnet. Transnet was deliberately dismantled. Once the pride of Africa with over 22,000 kilometers of railway, 7,500 wagons and 4,500 locomotives, moving over 200 million tons of goods, it had been reduced to a shell of its former self. This was not incompetence. It was deliberate sabotage. Today, Transnet barely moves 50 million tons of goods, and the enterprise is drowning in corruption. Fraud charges of over 34 million rand hang over its former executives, proving that this destruction was a deliberate betrayal of South Africa's people and our economy. I'm now going to hand over to Leslie Ivings, and I also want to acknowledge that on the space is Comrade Nkoshisensha Shezi. And Comrade Shezi, I see you've requested the mic, and I've activated your mic. I will give you an opportunity to speak just now. You've had a particularly terrible history with Pravin Gordhan because of the principled manner in which you stood up against him. And I've got a painful recollection of how you went to a meeting a couple of years ago in Pietermaritzburg to challenge Gordhan on all these evil things that he was doing. And when you stood up to speak, he instructed his thugs, the so-called security that he had with him, to beat you up. In fact, he shouted from that stage, "Get that man." And Comrade Shezi, I still have the very clear recollection of seeing you later that day after you have been beaten to a pulp, literally, that you were suffering from bleeding on the brain and severe injuries. This is the man who claimed to be a person of principle, a person who claimed to be a law-abiding citizen. And yet, under his instruction, the most horrible assault was carried out against you for no other sin, but that you had the courage to stand up in a meeting and to challenge Pravin Gordh for what he was doing to our nation. So, Comrade Shezi, we will come to you just now, but I'm handing the mic now over, as I promised, to Dr. Leslie Ivings. Then we will move on to Apostle Dr. Deza, and then Nkosazana Shashezi. Dr. Ivings, the mic is yours.
Good evening, Comrade Carl, and all your fellow listeners and guests. And I thank you for the invite to speak this evening on a subject that normally doesn't fall within my sort of ambit of expertise. But I would like to speak on it in a matter of an historical perspective. As an historian, I'm sure most people are aware that historians write biographies, and mostly biographies are written about dead people. And this is where I'd like to join with what Comrade Khadima had said, and that dead people or dead persons, in that fact, they do not know what is said anyway. But this means when we look at a character like the now late Pravin Gordh, we cannot just, for the sake of using the word, whitewash someone's character. We need to highlight those flaws, those controversies that followed him, that dogged him, that dogged the newspapers, that dogged what was in the public space. There is no space for us to remove parts of history. As you are very fond of saying, Comrade Carl, is that you say that history has no blank pages. So in this case, there can be no blank pages with Pravin Gordh. We cannot just edit out that which we do not like. The English general and later ruler of England, Oliver Cromwell, when he was being painted, when he was Lord High Chancellor, said to the painter, "You must paint me warts and all, with all the bad things and the good things." So when we come to analyze in final respect who was or who is Pravin Gordh, we cannot just leave the warts out. Because when we did that in the past, when we left out the warts, we ended up with an educational or an historical curriculum that whitewashed all the elements from various historical characters, that if we did not do it, a captured education system like it is now would not be possible, because we left things out. Look at the characters of Cecil John Rhodes. Look at the characters of many of the architects of the business empires that would eventually become major institutions in apartheid South Africa, like Anton Rupert. Think about all those biographies that are selectively written and put out in the public. And mind you, these were all done after these people had died. No one ever seemed to have mentioned those, but yet the damage that these people did was incalculable. When we look at, for example, the future biographers of Pravin Gordh, we must instruct him for the future and for the youth that come that will eventually want to read about all of this, that they must write about the warts that was Pravin Gordh. They must write about the scarring, the maiming, the violence that was committed not only against people like you just mentioned, Comrade Shezi's violence that was committed against him, but the economic violence that was committed against our country, committed against the enterprises that built this country, that made it a great power in Africa. We cannot leave those slates to be blank and say, oh, well, that was just some sort of happenstance, that it just was a byproduct of something else, or that we can shift the blame to others in the administration. No, this man, he held the posts, he was in charge, and therefore he must carry the blame. No one went and said when they wrote after the death of Adolf Hitler, well, you know, he was a jolly nice chap, really, except for that whole business with the Jews. He did run Germany rather nicely for a couple of years, so we cannot just keep ourselves blind to certain things, and then continue whitewashing someone's character because it meets a political end. This is indeed the primary particle of a fascist history, where history is controlled, and if you control history, then it's very easy, because then you can control the future, and the future of all the minds of children that will grow up and that will idolize and then become to hero worship him. And we made it might be well a joke that was said, that the Pravin Gordh fan club. But if history is continued to be written in such a way, then perhaps, yes, there will be Pravin Gordh fan clubs with little hats and where you pay membership fees, as ridiculous as it sounds. But the fact of the matter is, you neglect the truth will be wiped out, and your country, your people, your nation will be the poorer for it. And let history be a stark warning. Because of the colonial history being oppressed, we now still deal with the consequences thereof, and how many African countries, how many Latin American countries, and how many Asian countries, till this day, they struggle to remove these blots from their own curriculums and own leaders that led these countries, just because they held a certain pro-Western or pro-minority capital view, or even a pro-capitalist view. The reason why they are still hero worship. Let us deal with the man, warts and all, for now and forevermore. I thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leslie Ivings. Thanks for that perspective as a classicist and a historian. And yes, indeed, let's deal with the man, warts and all. I said that we will follow a particular order of speakers coming in, but I see that Papanu Pasha has joined us, and I know, to my surprise, that Papanu said to me she doesn't have an X account. I thought she would be on X, but be that as it may, she is using someone else's account under the very interesting Twitter or X handle at Van Tonder's wife. Very interesting. Papanu, I'm going to give you a chance, because you may not be able to use this account throughout the time that this X space may be continuing. So Apostle Dr. Deza and Nkoshusen Shashezi, please just be a little bit patient. You are being pushed one person back in order to get Papanu